Great. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to pre-finals of World Economic BP Debate Forum 2025. My name is Dhan Mishra. I'll be the chair for this round. With me on panel, I have
Hi, Arif Bansal, preference here. Please take yours and all the best.
Hi, Dinesh Bhandari. All the best.
Shivam here. All the best.
Hello everyone, Shivani Mishra, panelist for this round. All the best.
Great then. So, on the motion, the South prefers a world where the die with zero philosophy was the dominant approach to personal savings. Prime Minister, whenever you're ready, here.
Starting my speech on the backward count of three, two, one. Today, we stand at crossroads between traditional financial orthodoxy and a revolutionary approach to wealth. A tradition, a trad. I'm going to restart my speech. Three, two, one. Today, we stand at crossroads between traditional financial orthodoxy and a revolutionary approach to wealth. Here, I'm going to state my macro burden. In this debate, government will demonstrate that restructuring our fundamental relationship with money from hoarding to strategic consumption produces more equitable, economically dynamic, and personally fulfilling world. Our definitions of such personal savings include individual wealth accumulations, including cash reserves, investments, and assets beyond immediate consumption needs. Our dominant approach is herein is defined as a prevailing cultural form and financial planning methodology adopted by majority of society. Our model is of such. Citizens engage in comprehensive life cycle financial planning using sophisticated actuarial models that calculate personal survival thresholds based on health data, family histories, and lifestyle factors. They adopt age-based consumption strategies, aggressive experience investment during peak physical years such as the 20s to 40s, strategic downsizing and legacy giving during middle years 50s to 60s, and calculated asset-based depletion during the final decades. Our first pragmatic argument. We reduce inequality through disrupted wealth concentration. Why does our world create more equitable outcomes? Because the die with zero philosophy disrupts intergenerational wealth concentration patterns that perpetuate inequality. Current evidence shows how intergenerational transfers significantly increase wealth inequality. And our world break these concentration cycles only by encouraging consumption during earners' lifetime rather than accumulate just to give it off their offspring. And why does disruption creates lasting inequality improvements? Because preventing dynastic wealth accumulation forces each generation to create their own economic values rather than inheriting advantage. When wealthy families cannot pass concentrated assets to their heirs, economic opportunities become more meritocratically distributed. Why does this matter more than redistribution policy? Because preventing concentration at the source proves more effective than attempting redistribution after inequality already exists. Prevention requires less government intervention while achieving more sustainable equality outcomes. However, opposition might claim that this reduces beneficial capital accumulation with productive investment, saying that more inheritance creates more opportunity for investment. However, this is invalid because distributed consumption creates a better investment outcome rather than concentrated inheritance, because consumption supports diverse economic activities rather than concentrating capital in narrow investment vehicles fueled by wealthy families such as Adani or Ambani. Distributed economic activity generates innovation and opportunity created by consumption patterns across society rather than enforcing existing advantageous patterns. Secondly, to prove my principal argument, maximizing human flourishing through utilitarian resource allocation. Why does philosophy align with fundamental moral principle? Because the die with zero approach maximizes aggregate human welfare through optimal resource timing and diminishing marginal utility. Here, utilitarian philosophy shows that when wealth exhibits diminishing margin utility, they do something simple. Additional resources provide greater benefit to those with less. Our world here, through our model, optimizes this principle temporally. Consuming wealth during peak enjoyment years when individuals have greater capacity for experience and relationship building creates more total utility than saving for uncertain future consumption or posthumous transfer. But why does this strategic consumption maximize human flourishing? This is simple because experience and relationships provide memory dividends that compound over time, creating lasting utility streams from single expenditures. A meaningful experience at age 30 It generates decades of positive memories, while the same expenditure at age 80 provides limited temporal benefit. Why does this matter more than financial security arguments? This is simple. Because generated from human flourishing during peak life phases, optimal utility maximization requires balancing security with experience timing and not just endless accumulation. But here too, opposition might say that philosophy creates irresponsible planning and future insecurity. However, this too is invalid. Strategic consumption with survival thresholds in our model based on age, consumption factors, lifestyle factors, all of this comes into our model. And based on only that, do they save and spend as needed, making sure they die with zero. Excessive savings represents opportunity costs, resources that could have generated human flourishing instead accumulating unused. Why does this balance optimize moral outcomes? Because utilitarianism requires maximizing aggregate welfare, which demands optimal resources, timing rather than precautionary hoarding that serves primarily physiological rather than rational utility functions. All in all, by providing one main pragmatic and one main principle, which will be elaborated and reintroduced in my second speaker, this is why I am proud to propose. Thank you.
Thanking the speaker for the fine speech, calling upon leader of opposition whenever you're ready. Here.
All right. Am I audible and visible?
Yes to both.
Okay. Opposition frames this. Oh, sorry. I have to get a timer. Government frames this debate as a question of billionaires. They tell us that billionaires currently accumulate wealth and thus this is perpetuating old boys clubs and how this is inefficient for society. But what is the alternative? Because we hear from government that this will lead to greater societal spending, but the people like the Mamdani family, these people have like Amdani family, these have like billions in wealth. This wealth is unlikely to be reinvested into society, rather cast into these big luxurious projects such as yachts, such as these luxury watches, in order to maximize spending the money for the sake of spending the money, meaning that it will be redistributed at the top level, not contributing to any economic well-being of people at the bottom. But then let's move on to a strategic observation. An important clarification here is that this motion and this narrative really applies to the average Joe the most, the consumer who has maybe 50 to 60K in savings, because these are the people who like kind of could be the people who either die with zero or die with some that they could leave for their kids. The people who are at the very top, they don't even have personal savings. They keep their money in equity. They keep their money elsewhere in debt. They don't keep them in personal savings accounts like this motion specifies. But furthermore, we tell you that this narrative is perpetuated through the idealization of consumerist lifestyles, you showing them to be pleasureful with an excessive emphasis on materialistic pleasures, saying that if you use all of your wealth and you buy a bunch of materialistic products, you will feel happy, you will feel fulfilled, content, and great. You do not need to leave any money for your future generations. Then on to our two substantives. Firstly, on how this will lead to reckless spending through myopic short-term outlooks on how to use personal finances, contrary to this strategic consumption that we hear from OG. And secondly, on how individuals will now work better and for future generations, and how that will offer these middle class and poorer families a step up in the next generation. But firstly, on how this leads to reckless spending. What we tell you is that when you have these kinds of narratives that you have to spend everything before you die, it takes away the counterbalance, which the narrative of you shouldn't spend everything before you die, you should leave things for a rainy day fund away. This is needed as now people are already prone to spending in these like immediate pleasures which can be seen. And this only furthers this consumerist narrative which permeates through society. And secondly, we then tell you that long-termist ideals are less emphasized. Savings in a bank now seem meaningless. Investing in pension funds and stocks are now deeply deprioritized, as the money should be used, that there's this constant idea that if money is resting, it is not good money, that I must use every paycheck to as much as I can because I don't want to leave as much as possible. I want to spend as much as possible. The impact here is twofold. The changes here is twofold. Firstly, that you have this reassignment of value in life to not be in working to fund your next generation, but rather through consumer staples. So that is to say that you think that the things that you buy should give you greatest pleasure. That should, like the yacht that you just bought, should be the source of happiness. Secondly, we tell you that businesses then just experience greater positive growth because of investment in the long term, because individuals can see past their next paycheck. They can see that they need to save money and they need to invest it in stocks and in a Roth IRAs. The impact is that now you have also an economic buffer. We tell you that you have rainy day funds. So this encourages then fiscal discipline. And secondly, we also tell you that you have a greater intangible valuement of intangible items which do not directly contribute through these consumerist narratives to your pleasure. So you have this greater appreciation for experiences in life rather than these concrete objects, or such as an iPhone or a Mac. Okay, then we tell you, secondly, that individuals work better, which leads to better outcomes for future generations. We tell you that once you introduce the idea that you won't die with zero, you have greater care for the next generation. With the pressures of catering to the next generation, the goal behind work is no longer individual career achievement, but lifting up the next generation as well. This is to say, considering the next generation in how you will plan out your work, and thus work better, work harder in helping the next generation. And secondly, we tell you that the next generation benefits greatly from this step up. You immediately have better financial circumstances as the average Joe if you just inherited 60 grand. So we tell you that now, because you keep money in the pocket, you have better opportunities for the future. You have greater financial security. You can take greater risks. More startups can be created. Colleges tuition fees can be actually paid off. And for these reasons, because this debate doesn't exactly concern the 1%, the richest of the rich, but rather the people who are in the middle income brackets, very proud to oppose.
Thanking the speaker for the fine speech, calling upon Deputy Prime Minister whenever you're ready. Here.
I'll be starting my speech on the backward count of 3, 2, 1. On side opposition, they state a multitude of things. Firstly, to begin with, that the wealth is likely to not be reinvested back into the economy, and that this mainly applies to the average Joe and not the actual billionaires within this economy. But here's the fact in that we agree with the framing that not that the wealth would not be distributed, but that this applies to the average Joe, because that is who the majority of the economy lies within. That is the majority of the population. The majority of the population is the average Joe, a person who has 60,000, 50,000 in savings, and for them to spend it, because it actually matters how those guys, how that segment of the population actually spends their money. And that's what we offer here on side proposition. The happiness and the utilitarian principle of people being allowed to spend their money how they want, buy whatever they want, because they don't have an obligation to provide for someone who is not theirs later on, is what gives people the freedom and the autonomy to use their money how they want. As side opposition clearly stated, the goal behind work, if you allow for no die without zero policy, is that the goal behind work would be to help uplift the next generation and actually provide them with a set of basis. This makes a very simplification of a person who says they'll work only for the future generation. It'll make them work harder because they know they have to provide for the future generation. It doesn't allow them to exist in the today and now. And it actually creates a perpetual cycle where people keep working day-to-day jobs, paycheck to paycheck jobs, because they keep thinking if they save, the situation will actually get better when it will not. The fact is economics lies within aggregate demand and how much economies actually spend within businesses rather than how much they save and invest for future generations. Because both investments and savings are volatile. They are stagnant money that doesn't go back into the economy to help create more jobs, which hinders the progress of an economy as well as the amount of individuals who can get a job. And that's what we're arguing here on side proposition, that the average Joe will actually get more utility out of spending his money how he wants, out of spending it in his mid-20s, on his mid-30s, taking risks, putting his investment and his capital where he wants it to, maybe coming out as an investment for the economy in the future as a byproduct or as a liability. But it gives him the autonomy to spend his money how he wants and to how it really dignifies him to allow him to reach maximum happiness or allow him to take the risks. My second rebuttal is that this point here that wealth won't be redirected, it will. The more aggregate demand, which is the more people have the capability to take risks within the economy, the more the economy will grow. Because risks and entrepreneurship is what drives economies. Innovation in today's world is what has driven all the big economies of today. And if we allow people to gain the confidence in their head, if we allow consumers to gain the confidence that their economy will grow and that they can spend their money how they want without having to worry about what their kids who are not even alive yet have to save for it, then they can create businesses and they can create economies that actually grow. Yes, there will be mismanagement of money, but that will happen in any economy, even if it's in the status quo or in our counterfactual world. Now I'd like to move to my only argument, that the die with the zero is actually an engine of broad-based economic growth. A society in where people aim to spend money or give away their wealth generates more strong and stable growth. This is because of aggregate demand. When households plan to use their savings on experiences, gifts, and supports for children or friends, they create current consumption instead of delayed consumption. A couple who spends on travel services or their child's healthcare or something can inject cash back into restaurants, airlines, agencies, and shops. Those businesses would then go on to hire more workers because they have a greater revenue and a greater profit margin, who then will spend their new wages on housing, clothing, and education, their essentials. This is the Keynesian multiplier. Every dollar spent can generate more than $1 of GDP as it ripples through the supply chain. Contrast this with what the status quo has: large inheritances. If wealth is parked for decades, no matter if it's the average Joe or a billionaire, in low yield accounts, the immediate economic effect is near zero. Even after heirs receive their money, they often save it or use it to pay down existing debt. Transactions with a far smaller multiplier than new consumption or investment. In a die with zero world, the same funds create compounded economic activity, which they can do the most to support employment and tax revenue. This doesn't only account for billionaires, but for also average people, who are the main stakeholders in this debate over here. And there's a broader tax base involved in this pragmatic argument. Active spending and early transfers are also broaden the tax base. Sales tax, value-added tax, and income taxes on the new jobs created all rise on the money circulated. Governments can then spend more in infrastructure, health, and research without raising current taxes, which means there is a greater human capital and a greater amount of people who have an incentive to work and grow the economy as a whole. And even if side opposition argues that large people, billionaires already have money in investments or in equities or something such as this, there is nothing to say that their heirs won't mismanage the money. It's found very commonly that heirs of large conglomerates tend to mismanage the money. That's why here we are proud to propose this, that we would want to live in a counterfactual world where die with zero exists because of the fact that it reduces inequality, increases aggregate demand, and can grow the economy as a whole. That's why we're proud to propose. Thank you.
Again, the speaker for the fine speech, calling upon Deputy Leader of Opposition. Whenever you're ready, here.
All right, could I have just a minute to reorganize my notes? Thanks.
That's a minute.
Yeah, I'll be starting very soon. I'll be starting in 3, 2, 1. Okay, so first I want to talk about why we win this debate outright before I offer any rebuttal at all. So why do we outweigh whatever opening government has told us? Firstly, we tell you about, they say that they have more disposable income that they can use for fun. Literally, this is outweighed over our point on how the generations after them can get actual utility from that outweighs the utility of this current generation. Why? It's because they're unlikely to enjoy the extra benefits this disposable income can give them because of marginal utility, right? If they keep enjoying and giving themselves benefits that exist, for example, a bigger car or a bigger house, they're unlikely to get any extra happiness or utility from all of that because they simply get used to this new state of living. However, if you look at what the children is going to look like, if you do not give them any money left, they will simply have no money and they'll need an extreme amount of they will need a massive amount of like time and effort to make sure that they get and to get back all the money that their parents have lost them because they, I don't know, gambled it all away. So because of this, there is a much difference in utility because even though the parents may not enjoy this, the slight 50K that may go into a new car, the children will enjoy it much more because they'll be able to spend it on that are useful for them and things that are going to be invested for the future, like, I don't know, a college fund or just even food for them to have. Why do we outweigh? Another reason why we outweigh that point is because we have clearly told you why the common people, the average Joe, doesn't have this certain buffer when they have this disposable income that they have for fun. They have the opportunity to lose everything, and it's really, really difficult to make all of that back when you've made this loss. Okay, we've shown bad stuff that happens to people in the status quo, and not this like the principle of inequality that might like affect people 20 years down the line. And this is not something that opening government tells us. Okay, what else has been ignored that we've brought? We have also brought the idea that the people are going to invest in the stock market because that is a much better way of passing down assets to your children because that is how you just increase money passively. The thing is, this has all been ignored. The idea that we do get the idea of economic growth is more or less parallel on both sides of the house because on our side, we do have this idea that people do put money in the stock market and therefore these companies do get more money and they can get jobs. They can create new jobs based on this investing that goes into them. Okay, so what else do we hear? We hear that people are going to get extra money from working. In fact, we say this is a good thing because this makes sure they have this economic buffer, which I talked about it. All we heard about this is from PM, where they talk about how the model covers for it. The thing is, nobody is capable of predicting extreme events like recessions and stuff, right? All that happens is when this happens, they will simply not have enough money to use, and then they will suffer extremely. Okay, now I want to address this. The substantive on how this stops generational wealth. They tell us that they're going to invest massively and they're going to create new jobs. Why is this unlikely to actually affect the common people and only affects the people at the top? Because when you have this idea of spending as much as possible before you die, what happens is that you buy things that you don't necessarily need. This means that you do not buy like more wheat or more food for you to eat, but you buy the most expensive things like the latest 200,000 euro car, or if you're more wealthy, a yacht. What this means is that the money is not circulated within the common people, but all of that goes to the people at the very top that sells this luxury goods, that the people with this massive amount of disposable income that they don't know what to do, all of that money goes to them. And these people, there is simply no incentive they have not to increase the wage of their workers past minimum wage and make sure that they get the trickle down benefits of this. We have not heard anything from opening opposition why the money that goes to the people at the very top from this is going to go down to the people who are actually working. So what else? In fact, we tell you that this is more likely in our side of the house, that the people who are currently working in minimum wage have the opportunity to grow and get better in the future because of this idea on higher social mobility that we have. Because in their side of the house, the children have no sort of step up that they can have to make sure that all the parents' work has been useless now because they have no opportunity. They don't have money for college. And because the average Joe doesn't really get that many financial lessons from their parents who aren't like great investors, they don't really know what to do. So they're just left stranded without any money and no opportunity to get out of the social class in which they're already put in. So what this means is that they have when their parents have the capability of passing down this disposable income that they already had, they can now use that as a step up to potentially get
Right.
it's protect time to as a step up to go past the social class and move past. That is why I couldn't be prouder to propose this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, speaker, for the fine speech, calling upon member Gulf to open or closing half. Whenever you're ready, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. Hopefully I'm audible and visible. Yeah. Okay. I'll be starting in the reverse countdown of 3, 2, 1. Starting with some rebuttals, right? So first of all, OO said that it is very Oh said that when you're about to die, you are more likely to spend money on luxuries and stuff which will only benefit those at the top. However, this is not true because when you are when you are living, right, many people want to see the effect of their wealth while they're alive. That encourages them to spend on their family, or to spend on their friends or charitable causes rather than random items that only benefit themselves superficially or wealthy corporations. Therefore, they are contributing to the economy because they want to see the effect of all the money they have while they're alive. So also, since they're like very old, they're much more likely to be much more philanthropic about their money, right? Moreover, part of the die with zero philosophy also involves budgeting and scheduling, right? People set aside a security fund and decide how to allocate the rest, right? So these random splurges don't fit into this plan. They are inefficient for the goal of maximizing the fulfillment and impact that the person wants, right? Now to some of the main arguments they mentioned. So opposition argues that this die with zero encourages this reckless spending, leaving people unprepared for emergencies or like old age, right? This is a misunderstanding. The philosophy is like not just about like emptying accounts blindly, right? It's about optimized spending. Individuals still maintain a basic security fund for unforeseen events, but instead of hoarding the wealth unnecessarily, they prioritize meaningful experiences and impactful giving while alive, so that they can see the good that their money generates while they're still alive to see it, right? So the result then is like a balanced approach that reduces the regret and increases their life satisfaction.
Point of
And
information.
ensures financial no thank you and ensures financial security, proving that living fully today does not mean neglecting tomorrow. And then they claim that uh then they claim about like how it's neglecting future generations, right? And that people save money mainly to provide for their children, and the die with zero undermines this, and people will not care for the future generations anymore. In reality, actually, we're saying that that you should be giving while alive, and it's far more effective than waiting to pass on an inheritance, right? Parents can fund education, help children start businesses, or support housing, right? All of which creates real tangible benefits immediately. Moreover, distributing wealth during like one's own lifetime reduces this intergenerational inequality, ensuring that opportunities reach many more children and
Point of
not just
information.
those born into wealthy families. So this approach also teaches financial responsibility and life skills, preparing children to manage resources wisely. Um, and then they also talk about how like they talk about short-term consumerism and how people will buy like a bunch of random stuff, right?
Point of
Um,
information.
no thank you, please don't badger. This could and they talk about how this could become materialistic, promoting like frivolous spending on luxuries and instant gratification. This is again like a misrepresentation of the philosophy, right? Fundamentally, we're just saying that you keep a basic emergency fund, and you because you're alive and you want to see the good you're doing, you spend the money on the economy and you spend the money helping your friends and family. So now to our arguments, right? So this optimizes the timing of money use, right? One of
Point of
the strongest
information.
no thank you, please stop badgering. One of the strongest benefits of the die with zero philosophy is that it encourages people to spend their money at the times in life but it can give them the most happiness and fulfillment, right? Most traditional saving philosophies focus on accumulating wealth for the future, especially like old age, especially at old age, right? But the reality is that like money has different value at different stages of life. For example, traveling or learning something new at like 25 is a lot more enjoyable and rewarding than maybe like trying something new at 75, right? When physical limitations or like health problems may make the experience much less enjoyable for the person. So then people who adopt the die with zero plan their
Point of information.
finances and money to match their life stages. No thank you, they save enough for security but intentionally spend on experiences where they're most capable of enjoying them. This can then include education, adventure, travel, learning hobbies, or like health and fitness. And by doing this, the money becomes a tool for living a better life right now, improving their mental health, right? So then, what happens then is that individuals experience like higher satisfaction and personal
Point of
growth throughout their
information.
life, right? They avoid the common regret of having worked and saved tirelessly only to be like too too old or sick to enjoy their own wealth. No, thank you. Now, argument number two, how it replaces inheritance with living impact, right? Another powerful benefit is that it shifts the wealth from being inheritance to a tool for impact while alive, right? In many societies, like large fortunes are saved only to be passed on after death, right? And the recipients may benefit, but the giver never gets to see the difference it makes, right? So then the die with zero encourages people to give money or resources to family, friends, or society during their lifetime, which can create which can create meaningful change, right? So then the wealth is spent while the giver is alive. They can see the change to their
Point of information.
no, thank you. This approach ensures that the money actually improves lives in real time rather than sitting in a bank or being transferred as inheritance, which can sometimes exacerbate inequality or create dependency. With that, I'll address my case when my stance. So proud to oppose. Thank you.
Thanking the speaker for the fine speech. Just a little warning to everyone. Please make sure the time between every PY you ask is at least 15 seconds. Please don't bite the speakers. And also, please make sure you're not asking PYs before the first minute ends and after the fourth minute begins. These are protected times. Yeah, then. Member of opposition, whenever you're ready. Here.
Cool. I hope I'm clearly audible.
Yep.
Cool. Beginning then. 3, 2, 1. I'm going to be the very first speaker in this debate to go ahead and actually frame it for you. So, what does the counter narrative actually look like? We think this looks similar to status quo when you have things like banks and influencers and other parts of the financial ecosystem pushing you to save for the long term, things like retirement, passing it down to your children, etc. Understand that this debate, however, primarily affects those who are not incredibly affluent or well off. The simple mechanistic reason for this is just that people who are the top 1% of society don't need money alone to succeed within society. They're entrenched within the system already. They've invested a lot historically into things like real estate, etc., and passed down literal billion-dollar companies. But to be charitable, I'm still going to engage with this later. But secondly, how is the die with zero narrative pushed, right? It's pushed mostly by companies through advertisements, right? Where they tell you should buy something to not have regrets when you die, no matter what it is, and you're likely to do it because counter narratives do not exist because this is the dominant narrative. This would also mean predatory industries like casinos, etc., rise a lot more, considering this is a retrospective route, since they can tell you personal savings don't matter to the same extent, because if you're going to spend it before you die, and you as an individual under the veil of ignorance really do not know when you'll die, so you can end up spending it now. We think this also means that individuals just do not save a lot within their lifetime as well. At maximum, if we're being charitable, they save a minuscule amount for retirement, but it's not really a really large amount. But why do you continue to spend more in the long term, right? Because your overturn window shifts, you're more likely to continually spend more. Simple reason for this is you go ahead and spend a bunch of money. The sort of dopamine release that you get is something that is very hard to stop. The baseline of what you see as extreme spending only continues increasing, and at that point it is very hard to participate in de-radicalization. Two arguments that firstly, just on larger econ impact. Note that I'm going to add stands OO does not mention at all. Note that since this is a retrospective debate, people just do not end up saving as much in banks and mutual funds and pension funds, etc., from the beginning, right? We think that's the kind of culture that emerges, meaning that institutions like banks or pension funds that require household savings to go ahead and loan it to others to invest, to ensure that investment exists in an economy, can no longer go ahead and set up, right? What this means is then you just do not see investment in the economy, because a lot of people whose saving is a direct reason you're able to go ahead and have large firms emerge, or you're able to build infrastructure, just do not have the means or the capacity to go ahead and get a loan without these savings, right? Note that we do not get any alternative from either government pension why you get this level of investment on their side, which means that long-term investment and innovation is something that only exists with our counter narrative and is something that doesn't emerge with their narrative at all, right? But secondly, we also think you see a lot more reliance on government welfare. Why? Because as I've already told you, that there are minuscule savings for retirement at best, right? We think these end up then, in most cases, running out quicker than people die. Because as we told you, the culture becomes to spend so much throughout your life, you're going to find it incredibly hard to end up spending a lot more when you're at the end of it, right? We think this means that a lot more people end up reliant on government welfare, right? But secondly, you have no savings for emergency. If God forbid something terrible happens, like an accident or somebody ends up in the hospital, you just do not have the savings to go ahead in that moment. Or if you have an expensive hospital bill at the end of your life, to go ahead and actually pay for that, right? What this means is then the government has to step in a lot more. There's a lot more welfare spending, which means the government themselves can also not go ahead and spend on stuff like infrastructure, which means you see twofold loss of innovation and infrastructure and overall development. Because A, not only do you not have private actors, but B, the public sector is so tied up in welfare. But secondly, I just want to come here and very quickly tell you on this whole income inequality thing, right? We're going to bite the bullet here and tell you from the very beginning that sure, let's say billionaires end up saving the same amount for their kids as people who are poor. Even if you buy that analysis, you still see a few things. Within the lifetime, we see rich kids being a lot better off, right? Because they still have better education, they still have access to connections, etc. Middle class individuals do not have this, which means that when you have a die with zero mentality, you hurt them a lot more. Since they not only do not get these advantages, they also do not have any sort of savings that they can build up from. But secondly, poor people have a lot more volatility in their jobs. That is to say, even during the worst economic crisis, Bill Gates can still comfortably live, his kids can still comfortably live. You can't say that about an Amazon worker. This harm is done so much worse on their side, because on their side, the kids from poor families never actually get any sort of economic help, any sort of economic net that they can depend on, which is why we are so proud to oppose.
Thanking the speaker for the fine speech, calling upon GovWeb to close of GovBench.
Okay, so 1 second, just setting up my timer. Okay. I'll take all POIs verbally, and my pronouns are she, her, and I'll begin in the voice countdown of 3, 2, 1. Panel, let me start by taking down the opening opposition's case. So OO gave you two big things, which was security and inheritance. On security, they assume that die with zero means recklessness. That is a false claim, because we told you explicitly that die with zero philosophy builds in retirement and healthcare buffer, something only our model mentioned, considering the fact that we gave a model while opening government didn't. The real problem is oversaving, because most people die with large unused balances because they were too cautious. That money never brought them happiness, time, or health, and OO only protects them against a hypothetical risk that we just proved can't happen. Now let me move on to their second claim of how the average person won't do this. While opposition says that the die with zero philosophy only works for the rich because ordinary people have too many risks, healthcare, retirement, kids' futures, but that misinterprets doesn't read into our model at all, because die with zero is not just reckless spending, it's structured saving with realistic buffers, and then avoiding keeping it all beyond that. In fact, the average person benefits the most on our side. Why? Because they are the ones who lose out by oversaving. Imagine you're a man in your 20s and your 30s, and you never take trips, you never invest in experiences, and you never
Point of
spend
information.
on yourself, I'll take it later, just to die with unspent savings. You've wasted your one shot at life. Of course, when we say this, we are also talking about our own model, where like the first speaker of closing government said, does mean that you have savings for healthcare and for the accidents that closing opposition does talk about. It means that you can spend it. It means, but the fact that die with zero corrects this by letting them use money at points of highest utility, like raising child or enjoying youth, instead of saving pointlessly until then. Because if only the rich can afford under the status quo, then making die with zero the dominant cultural norm is exactly what redistributes those benefits. Insurance markets, pensions, and planning tools adapt to help the average person manage risk while still living fully. Now let me take down closing opposition's point. Closing opposition talks about points. The first point is yet again about how Die with Zero is reckless spending and is going to be gone to such horrible uses like gambling and casinos and whatnot. But like I say once again, Die with Zero isn't reckless. It builds in buffers and insurance. In a world where this is the norm, people keep realistic emergency savings and hedge through inheritance instead of hoarding huge sums of money just in case, while opposition's model makes everyone waste their whole life planning for accidents that may never come. Our model protects against shocks and lets people actually live. And there's another point that they clearly made was about how these children and the relatives and the next generation of these members of the family members of the everyman won't ever get this money. Well, we'd like to reiterate and flip it on their frame. While we say that, yeah, they will get the money, but instead of getting it as soon as their father or their mother dies at 90 while they're 60, wouldn't it be more beneficial to give them this money at 25, let them build a career of their own, let them go to college, let them build on this fund instead of keeping it until they die when the child is 60 and has nothing else to do in their life? Now, on the second point, they talk about economics. They say that youth banks and investments
Point of
are
information.
saving causes segregation. Trillions sit idle in the hands of elderly savings while youth face housing crisis and debt. While Die with Zero accelerates capital circulation, people spend, donate, and give earlier, which leads to higher multiplier effect in the economy, which is an overall benefit that opposition doesn't give you. Now, let me move on to the two clear clashes. The first one was which one
Point
could
of
give
information.
you. I won't be taking it. Opposition priorities fears of uncertainty. We prioritize realistic planning and maximizing utility at each life stage. And the mechanism behind this that we give you
Last
is
chance.
that no, I won't take it. Front load experience in youth. It provides resources to kids when they're starting out, keep enough for retirement. This creates smooth consumption curves instead of a cliff where money piles up at the end. And why we win is because we solve both material security and the tragedy of wasted wealth and wasted time. And the second one is about which one, and the second clash would just be about overall benefits. Op frames legacy as inheritance and debt. We reframe it as empowerment when it matters. The mechanism is that when the mechanism behind this is when you transfer it at ages 25 to 35, there are higher loss chances and there's social mobility and there's so many more endless possibilities than inheriting that money at 60. And why we win is because our world breaks the cycle of inequality while giving resources when they can actually transform lives. So on the individual impact, Die with Zero maximizes lifetime happiness, regret-free living. People don't die with money that they couldn't use. They die with memories, experiences, and stronger family ties. And for all those reasons, I think closing up wins. So proud to propose.
Thanking the speaker for the fine speech, calling upon Op-Whip to close off the debate. Whenever you're ready, here.
Right, well, am I clearly audible? Can I speak at this volume?
Yep, it's fine.
Alright, cool. I'll take the eyes only via chat, so please don't verbalize, starting on first try. Three things in this page. Firstly, dealing with OO, you get two major claims from them. The first on reducing inequality. I'm going to respond to this in multiple ways. One, understand that the rich are probably going to go ahead and push things like real estate to pass down these generations, right? They have other counterbalancing narratives because they need to go ahead and have things like legacy and status to go ahead and maintain within their circles of society. So they're more likely to go ahead and just like ignore this narrative within the first place. However, the people who are hurt most by these narratives are not Ambani or Adani, but rather just like your average middle class person who no longer saves to the same extent anymore and falls prey to like the sort of coercive advertisements that you see on a day-to-day basis on platforms like YouTube, etc. But second, we'll be extremely charitable. Even if this happens, even if we say that redistribution happens, and note that this is being extremely charitable right now, this goes ahead and creates resentment from the richest people in society in the long term, which leads to them having self-selective biases when they go ahead and interact with people who are poor. Social contact theory just does not work here, which means that even if you have sort of short-term redistribution through, let's say, welfare, etc., what they end up doing is that they go ahead and use things like their lobbying power to go ahead and talk to governments to like stop that sort of policy within the first place. Note that not all countries are like America where they have significant amounts of bargaining power. If you're a developing country and like Shell comes and talks to you and they're annual revenues are literally bigger than your GDP, they're probably going to go ahead and like accept their deal anyways. This would be catastrophic because not only does it mean that governments go ahead and cut these policies in the long term, it also means that the sort of corporate activities that you have, things like pro bono, things like CSR, things like giving scholarships, just do not exist anymore to the same extent. Note that this is retrospective, so they cannot tell you that there's a legal obligation to go ahead and do this anyways. But then the CG literally concedes that you can go ahead and spend this on like your kids and family. So then we're unclear on why you just can't pay to go ahead and get a donation seat into Harvard and how that does not worsen inequality within the first place. We never thought inequality was about taking away apples from people. We thought it was about giving the apples where people actually deserve it. But the second thing that they tell you is that this maximizes happiness. We just do not think this happens because we already told you about the Overton window. There's diminishing marginal utility and returns as you go ahead and buy more and more. And since you are like, even if we assume that you're going to go ahead and pass it down to your children, they still go ahead and fall prey to the same capitalistic narratives that like opening talks about, because like you're still going to go ahead and spend the entire thing just because like you have those incentives to go ahead and do this. There's no longer financial counterbalance that makes you go ahead and save, because now what they tell you is that you have to spend all of this before you die to be able to go ahead and maximize happiness or whatever. So you're more likely to go ahead and subscribe to those short-term things. But second, because you no longer get the same amount of like utility from each object, you go ahead and spend more and more. We told you that this leads to like a slippery slope of the worst kind. But it is a maximization of utility when you go ahead and pass down the money within the middle income circle, because understand that you're probably going to spend some amount of money on either side of the house on things like entertainment. Like I'm sure half of us within this room at least have like a Netflix subscription in the first place, and understand that there's not an obligation to go ahead and maximize happiness. And the reason is quite simple. You cannot maximize choice on either side of the house, considering either side has coercive like narratives that are spread by financial bodies anyways. So this argument simply does not matter. But even if we had to take the best case, we would posit scarcity gives this happiness more and more value. I mean, understand spending as a whole is not a good thing. One, in things like human rights, because if I have to go ahead and like buy a new phone, that probably means that some child in Congo is now being coerced to like, I don't know, do work for like insane wages. But then two, automation, even if automation happens, that just puts unskilled laborers out of jobs. But then say on the environment, this is really bad because like I need resources to go ahead and do all of this. I want to take down CG's case. Know that they're super derivative, but we're still engaged. A basic security fund just does not work, right? Understand that like if you were to go on and have this, the baseline amount of savings would have to keep increasing because cost of living is increasingly getting higher and higher just because of the global instability that exists. And secondly, people are not going to go ahead and save. There's an Overton window, there's cognitive dissonance, there are irrational incentives that we've talked about, which means people do not have a cognitive baseline in the first place. But second, note that the vast majority of people just cannot go ahead and have things like hobbies under capitalism because you just do not have the time. So what that means is that you go ahead and spend on things like, I don't know, cars or whatever, rather than actual art classes. So we just do not think you have that sort of skill maximization either. But I want to take down OO really quickly then. Note that we're far, far better than OO because their case is contingent on individuals getting much, much better off. Note that our argument uniquely proves why on a macroeconomic perspective, you just get better off, right? Note that this is really important, especially if you buy that this is retrospective